Hello, welcome to the Scroll Ensemble Classical Music Improvisation channel. I'm Robert. This video is to celebrate 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're so happy and so grateful. Thanks for joining us for this time, supporting us, following us, and sharing our videos, etc., etc. I also want to do a special shout out to our Patreon supporters, old and new. Thanks so much. It helps a lot that you're there. If you're not there yet, do join us there as well for some nice extras. So this video is going to be a little interview with myself, specifically about how I got started with improvisation and how I developed that. There is new material coming up as well. I have so many things almost ready, but recently in all my talks and workshops, this has been a question that has come up several times. So I thought maybe there is an actual interest in this question. I don't really like putting myself in the limelight in that kind of way, but maybe it's something that will be interesting for you. Otherwise, just continue browsing YouTube and soon there will be many other videos from us as well. So my earliest memories of improvising were when I was singing in the bath. Here I am, also probably quite a bit younger. The first memories that I have of improvising in the bath were when I had already started going to school. We were learning songs in school and I loved singing there, but I couldn't quite remember the songs and especially not the words. It's still a huge issue for me. My daughter is always being like, oh my God, how can you still not remember those lines? And so what I do remember is sitting in the bath, trying to sort of sing those songs and just giving it my own spin since I couldn't quite remember what they were like. So I started exploring singing and songs, and it wasn't a conscious process or anything. It's just something I enjoyed and I still love singing under the shower. Another part of exploration for me was the piano. I loved the piano when it came into our home, but it was for my sister. And when I asked if I could have piano lessons, it was like, no, you're already doing other things. The piano is for your sister. So I remember whenever they would go out of the house, and anyway, very quickly my sister became extremely talented. So I wasn't able really to play what she was playing, but whenever they would leave the house, I would just go to the piano and just try to make some sounds that were kind of like what my sister was playing. And I really enjoyed that exploration of finding the sounds and of then kind of making a little bit my own things out of that. They were probably very, very bad, but I loved doing it. And I think that is a place where I really got an interest in exploring sounds and also accepting just whatever I did was part of a journey that I was on. Improvisation also gave me the opportunity to be in different musical contexts. Here you can see me on the clarinet. Yes, I used to play that. And an interesting context for me there was jazz music. I had a very interesting friend in high school. This is not me in high school, although I didn't look that much older. And this friend in high school, he was a jazz piano player. He introduced me to so many different kinds of music that were, now I realize more and more, that were very influential for me. All kinds of musics from all over the world, but also all kinds of jazz music, fusion music, free jazz, etc., etc. And we did our own little improvisations, even also in school sometimes we played. I even did a jam session where I learned also about how interesting this kind of context of playing and improvising is. And another context in high school was with another piano player, but a modern piano player. He was improvising, and I don't know how I got it into my head that I would somehow join him. He could play, Chopin or whatever. I couldn't play any of that, but he would improvise and I would just tingle along, and we'd have these duets that we even got sort of hired for some school things where we'd play in the background. I'm sure, again, it wasn't fantastic in any case what I did, But it was interesting to see how music could be so different from the usual classical music context of playing a concert. But I could play in the background, I could be playful with this friend, either in jazz or even in this classical music language. And also when I improvised at home, it was usually in a tonal language, some pop music, some jazz-like things, but mostly it was this classical kind of thing. There's also other contexts that then later on in life I could start improvising within, like the theater, or in a movie we were improvising with the ensemble, or with artists, or with a drawing robot. But I think the feeling that would be a nice thing to do, and also sort of ease with all these kind of worlds, for me at least, really started here at this point, where this was just a natural way to approach music. So the first kind of reason that I wanted to make this video was to talk about this part of improvisation, this part of what it means to me, which is a way to process life. So of course it was very important for me in terms of connecting to classical music, to other people, learning music as a language, to being creative. But I actually think more and more the most important thing was that in language I didn't quite know how to express certain feelings, and I didn't always have places to really process that. I didn't have a diary, didn't really like the idea, and somehow in sports, etc., I couldn't express everything that was going on. And in music I could, but not other people's music, but in my own music, however rudimentary it was, because I didn't even know what like C major was. So whenever I was improvising on the piano, there was not really a goal, like especially later on anymore. I didn't want to sound like Beethoven or Chopin or anything that my sister was playing beautifully, but it was just a free flow of thoughts. And it's interesting to me to sometimes read also some 18th century descriptions, like Czerny describing Beethoven's way of improvising really freely, but even Otteter, you can watch that video as well, Otteter describing the trait as just a free thing that comes directly from the mind onto the instrument. So it must have also been a thing that 18th and 19th century, and maybe even earlier, musicians would have done. And the feeling is amazing, to get into that flow state, no judgment, and just to, all this stuff is coming out and is given a space without having to verbalize or having to therapize or anything. And so that was something that I wanted to maybe in a way gift you. This, if you are busy with improvisation and classical music, and the way it's taught now often is quite serious, you have grammar rules, counterpoint, or even when it's free improvisation, it's either with people, but people often start talking about textures and about what it means or how to construct it. And maybe you're already doing this, but if not, I want to give you this permission to just sit with your instrument and make whatever music comes out, loud, bad, crap music, beautiful, soft, single notes, whatever. Just, to me, and still, this is sometimes the most important thing about improvisation. So maybe this is something that can help you too. So then when I got to the conservatory, I hadn't really realized that so few other people were busy with improvisation, especially in these kind of classical music or early music languages. And so I met James Hewitt, the violinist that you can also see on this channel and that I'm still in an ensemble with. We started our scroll ensemble pretty early on, and we realized that both the audience and fellow students were quite impressed with this idea that we could improvise also as a group. And also there we still did quite random things, but somehow, because almost no one else did it, it was something that I felt like, oh, I could show off with this, and I really enjoyed that. And it was a moment that I could step into a limelight that I had not really been in, or I had just been in small music schools and just played inside my high school. But this was the first time I was playing for some bigger audiences, and going out into the world with my music, and I really enjoyed showing off. And I think improvisation helped me with that, and it was an important step also for me to do that, to realize I could just be free on the stage. Like, I used to love doing theater in high school. There I also had this one play where I would go and take the audience and get them to sing and clap along, and these elements of being quite extrovert and connecting with the audience in that way were very important for me at that point, although also had their dangerous sides. So after this initial period of just pure joy and experimentation and just playing whatever we wanted, some of our teachers started commenting on trying to look at some historical sources, at looking at really focusing in one improvisation on a specific approach or composer, because all our improvisations started kind of sounding the same, and we started wanting to really use improvisation in our entire concerts. So in that sense, there came an interesting period of historical awareness where we started looking at some sources and being more aware of all the, freedoms we were taking. And you could maybe argue, it's nice to develop your own style. You don't have to be into one style specifically, but I don't think we were also aware of any of that at all. So this was a very, very important step for us to take more seriously on board the history of our instruments, of our music, of our styles. And so at that point, we formed really an ensemble. We were working every week, and in an interesting way, and that's why I wanted to also mention the show-off parts, that kind of bravura really left for me for a while. I started becoming quite insecure, and I was really not sure, because I started realizing I don't really know what notes I'm playing. I don't know anything about harmony or counterpoint for that matter. And some of my colleagues were more experienced, older, or had been taught more in that way. And so, it was a difficult time for me. At the same time, we started getting more work, also playing and teaching. And so, as this is also a video in a way about what improvisation brought me and could maybe bring you, or what it did for me, what it means to me, is these very new, interesting ways of working with people and getting work for myself. And what you can actually see here is Jason and me at a film set improvising for a dance scene. So after a more formal period, I realized that the audience didn't always realize we were improvising. This could be fine, and probably historically, definitely up to sort of 1800 would also be sort of correct. Improvisation being just a sort of real-life version of composing onto the page of life. So, but I was personally more interested in how we could make it clear to the audience that we were improvising, and especially in a way that we wouldn't necessarily say it, but that they would just realize it by the way we did it. So one way, as you can see here, was by using these cards where the audience would influence what we were doing. We did the same also with little stories or an app, or with cards that people could write on, or with a CD game that you can see on our channel as well, where the audience can stop us and tell us, now we want the same music but to sound like this or that. And one could argue that is a little bit gimmicky, but what I like about this is that you get this different kinds of communication with the audience, where they also start sharing something of themselves. They see something of themselves on stage, or of someone they maybe don't know, but they get to know during this process. And so I think it creates a little bit of community, a different way of being with the audience. And that, in effect, gives a kind of freedom that I otherwise don't feel on stage. I can do, in a way, whatever I want. Of course, I have some restrictions for myself stylistically whenever I start an improvisation, but I also love these things to a certain extent are unpreparable. So also when you're there, you surprise yourself. There is this freedom, almost I would say this freedom from yourself. So you don't have to be your kind of stale cliche ideas that you keep reproducing. And I just love that feeling. So I already spoke a little bit about this freedom, the way improvisation could just roll off the tongue, so to speak. And on the other hand, this historical awareness, this wanting to follow certain rules or aesthetics. And yeah, to me that came to a sort of confrontation between how much am I busy in my head and how much do I just let it go. And this is something that really interests me kind of in every concert, because even with written music, I feel that is the case to a certain extent, but especially with improvisation, you could really think about each note, and especially when you're playing with other people, you could really try to analyze, oh yeah, they're going to the dominant, they're going to this, they're playing these notes, they're playing this motive, this idea, they're suggesting this to me. Everything could be analyzed all the time. And to a certain extent, that's probably should also partly be there when you're playing with other people in these kind of styles. If someone plays a fifth, in certain styles, you can't add a sixth or a sharp four or whatever. In any case, because some other people play a certain note, those notes or other notes may become off limits to you because they don't work well with those notes. But you wouldn't know that they're going to play those notes yet. So very quickly you have to realize that, analyze that. But there's also this other way where I've come to realize that when I actually let go of that, very often I can kind of improvise with almost anyone, and it will sort of go well. There, of course, will be mistakes, but in the general flow and the result for the audience, the result is nice. So for me, this is an extremely interesting thing that at least I have learned from improvisation. To what extent am I busy with the thinking, and to what extent do I just let go and just play? I think both camps have strong proponents in both written and improvised music. And I love playing with the ratio of this for each improvisation. So then came an interesting moment for me where I started realizing improvisation was a separate thing that I would do in a separate box in my teaching, in my improvisation concerts, and then not really in written music. Maybe I'd add a little ornament here or there, but basically in most music I would just play and be inside the expected box. And I realized I don't really want to play like that. And I started experimenting a little bit with that here and there in places that I felt safe, and sometimes it was very, very much welcomed. I also had situations where a conductor would come to a colleague and be like, are they actually going to do that in a real concert, or is that just for now, like a little joke? And yeah, some people were scared of that. But I realized that if possible, that's how I wanted to make music. And also realized, especially in the 19th century, but I'm pretty sure it must have also happened in earlier practices, that when you are an improviser, this will influence how you play with timing, how you could have improvised a piece like that, sort of. And thus you can sort of compose that piece into the moment, even though you already know, of course, the notes. But it's a very different way of performing music if you're experienced with not having all this prior knowledge of what it's going to sound like, of putting it together in the moment. And as you can see also in my video about Joachim, this was something that was very much respected and wanted, at least in that period, early 20th century, late 19th century, where they would say it was as if Beethoven arose from the dead and just composed his concerto anew for us. And so I started thinking of ways in which improvisation could be taught and shared, that people would take that into their general practice. And this is an example of that, where we taught a class on how to create your own etude, hoping that people would take improvisation into their daily practice, because you could improvise a scale. I mean, you could practice a scale, or you could improvise a prelude based on a scale, and probably the effects could be quite similar. And then at the same time, I started having to deal with certain expectations from others. Sometimes I didn't want to play freely or improvise loads of ornamentation. I just didn't think the piece needed that, or I wasn't in that kind of mood. But I felt this expectation that I should do that because that's what Robert does. So it was also very interesting to kind of deal with that, to play with that, to accept sometimes this is what I want to do, to also accept I found this wonderful ornamentation for this particular section. I could try to come up with something else. It's not going to be as good. So I'll just regurgitate that part and be new and freer in other parts. So I think where I'm at now is this kind of tension between learning a style and one's personal style. And I think this is very interesting. And I used to have this ideal that if I'd improvise something in the style of Bach, and if I were really successful, there could be this fictitious idea that the next day someone would find a hidden manuscript that had not yet been found, and in this manuscript would be the exact same music that I had been improvising the night before. But then now I realize, actually, would that really have been something that I would have wanted? And also Bach, of course, he emulated composers to learn, and he took that all inside of himself. But I think, especially later on in his development, if he would have tried to improvise in the style of Handel, would he have wanted to improvise something, and then if he would have then heard or found a piece by Handel that was exactly what he improvised, would he have been like, yes, job well done? Or would he have tried to really make it his own, to incorporate it, to, eat all of that up, and then make his own recipe? And I think that would have been more something that people would have been interested in that time. Maybe not literally in these kind of romantic or also modern ways of thinking about it, like you always have to do something new. Not really like that, but it's just, I feel it would have been just the way they would have approached music. What can I learn from this? What do I like? Now, how do I go on with my own style? And so that's something that I've been really interested in lately, and I've been trying to do. And I will immediately admit that this is also easier for me than, compared with a piano player or a violinist, for example. My repertoire on a recorder or oboe is a bit smaller. There are also some lesser gods that have written music, so it is also a bit more easy to say like, oh yeah, look at this piece, it's wonderful. I could sort of improvise something like that. I would never say, of course, as good or whatever. It's probably also not important. It's not the point whether it's as good or not. But it's easier to kind of step over this feeling of like, oh, I shouldn't, when you know that not all of your repertoire is going to be that much better. And at the same time, not everything has been done. So one thing that I've been interested in is the use of chorale melodies. Of course, on the piano, organ, even on the violin, you can find this. But on the recorder, at least so far, I haven't found a solo piece. So I wrote my own fantasia on Aus tiefer Not. And so that's wonderful. I can relatively easily come up with new ideas for my instruments. Bach has written some suites for other instruments where you get a double, a repeat of the same, but as a sort of ornamented version. He hasn't really done that for the flute, let alone for the recorder or oboe. So it's another place where I can improvise something and really be like, yeah, that's my idea. Of course, I took it from Bach, but it's always going to be different on my instruments doing it right now. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to all of this. Hopefully it has been interesting to you. Sorry if it wasn't. I promise I won't do it again in that case. And see you for the next videos. It's going to be videos on Van Eyck. the Drouet flute method with ideas of modulation and ornamentation. I want to look back at Czerny and his ideas for monothematic fantasias and how to use that myself. And want to talk about different approaches to learning improvisation. And then there's loads of interviews with very interesting people coming up. So I hope to see you soon here again.